Greetings, dear viewers. This is the Krasmodo channel. A turbocharger, or simply turbo, is practically synonymous with high power, lots of torque, and in some cases, unstoppable drive. However, while turbochargers can be found everywhere on trucks or passenger cars these days, why aren't there turbo motorcycles? Or are there after all? In this segment, I invite you to have a few words about motorcycles with turbochargers. As usual, we'll go over a bit of theory and the history of this type of supercharger, get acquainted with motorcycle models that use this technology, and also figure out why so few of them have been made throughout history. Make yourself comfortable and grab something to snack on. Let's get started. As soon as humanity invented the internal combustion engine at the end of the 19th century, the question of improving its performance arose. How can this be done without changing the engine's displacement? Yes, over time, engines evolved, the valve timing system improved, the fuel system was perfected, and so on, and naturally their performance increased. But if we look at it from a purely theoretical point of view, a naturally aspirated engine, during one cycle, due to the vacuum created when the piston moves down, can only take in a certain amount of the air-fuel mixture. Engineers began working around this limitation as early as the early 20th century. And the solution was to force more air into the engine, which means more fuel would also enter the combustion chamber. And naturally, this mixture would be under higher pressure. And this means that more energy will be released in a single cycle, and accordingly, a greater force will be exerted on the piston, and this promises a noticeable increase in torque power. That's how the supercharger was invented. Superchargers for internal combustion engines are grouped by drive type. The first type is mechanical superchargers, which are driven by the rotating parts of the engine, the so-called superchargers. Sometimes you may come across the term blower. The second type is superchargers driven by exhaust gas pressure. These are turbochargers, or simply turbo, as people call them. And the third, and the newest, are electric superchargers. Some sources call such a device an electric turbocharger, but that's not entirely correct, because the prefix turbo means it's driven by exhaust gases. The history of motorcycle engineering knows plenty of cases where both superchargers and turbochargers were used to increase the power of two-wheeled vehicles. I'm not going to mix up all types of superchargers in one story. In this video, we're interested in point number 2, which is turbo. And that means I won't be talking about the much revered Kawasaki H2R right now, because Kawasaki uses a supercharger. However, don't rush to turn off the video. The topic of turbocharged motorcycles is very interesting, and there will be a separate story about two-wheelers with a mechanical supercharger. Give a thumbs up if you're waiting for the supercharger episode. So, a bit of theory. The operating principle of a turbocharger is based on using the energy of exhaust gases. The flow of these gases hits the turbine wheel and spins it on a single shaft, where another wheel is located that forces atmospheric air into the engine cylinders. At first glance, it seems we only gain benefits like increased torque power. However, the turbocharger also has a number of drawbacks. First, the mixture of gases compressed by the turbine has a higher temperature, which leads to a greater likelihood of detonation. In addition, the heated mixture has a lower density. To solve this problem, you can do the following: lower the engine's compression ratio, use higher octane fuel, and also install an intercooler for the boost air, also known as an intercooler. Secondly, there is an unpleasant effect called turbo lag, and this image shows the principle of this effect. In practice, this effect is the delay between pressing the throttle and the turbocharger spinning up with exhaust gases, resulting in enough pressure in the intake and accordingly an increase in power. It should be noted that one way or another since its inception, turbocharging has developed and evolved, with the components of this system becoming lighter, more compact, and more efficient. And a number of drawbacks can be addressed with varying degrees of success, but you still won't see turbo motorcycles everywhere on the street. And I'll answer this question after getting acquainted with the representatives of this rare two-wheeled family. A bit of history about the turbocharger. The principle of turbocharging was patented by Swiss engineer Alfred Bucci in 1911 at the United States Patent Office. Alfred already in 1905 successfully carried out supercharging using exhaust gases for the first time, achieving a power increase of up to 120%. This event marked the beginning of the gradual development and implementation of turbo technologies. The use of the first turbochargers was limited to extremely large engines, particularly those used in ships. And in aviation, turbochargers were used with some success on fighters with Renault engines during the World War I. By the second half of the 1930s, technological advancements made it possible to create truly successful aircraft turbochargers, which were mainly used on highly boosted engines to improve high-altitude performance. The greatest success in this was achieved by the Americans, who installed turbochargers on the P-38 fighters and B-17 bombers in 1938. In 1941, the United States developed the P-47 fighter with a turbocharger, which gave it outstanding flight performance at high altitudes. In the automotive field, truck manufacturers were the first to use turbochargers. In 1938, the first turbo engine for a truck was built at the Swiss Machine Works Sauer factory. The first mass-produced passenger cars equipped with turbines were the Chevrolet Corvair Monza and the Oldsmobile Jetfire, which entered the American market in '62 and '63. Despite their obvious technical advantages, the low level of reliability led to the rapid disappearance of these models. In the 70s of the last century, the turbocharger comes to Formula One and some other races. Against this background, the popularity of the turbo increases significantly, and every self-respecting car manufacturer includes a model with a turbocharger in their product lineup. However, this bright idol is disrupted by a well-known event of the 70s, the fuel crisis. You remember that a turbocharged engine consumes more fuel compared to its naturally aspirated counterpart, and now there was a widespread trend toward reducing fuel consumption. Moreover, the turbochargers of that time had significant lag in response, which was a serious argument against installing a turbo on a gasoline engine. But the development of the turbocharger didn't stop. In 1973, a turbocharger was installed on the production model BMW 2002 Turbo, and already in 1974 on the Porsche 911 Turbo. In 1978, the Mercedes-Benz 300 Sonder diesel debuted, the first passenger car with a turbo diesel engine. 3 years later, diesel Volkswagens followed Mercedes, and by increasing their power-to-weight ratio, they managed to maintain a fairly low fuel consumption. Here's the thing. It's somewhat easier to install a turbocharger on a diesel engine. The exhaust gas temperature in a diesel is lower, which reduces the heat resistance requirements for the turbo, and as a result, lowers the cost of the unit. Oh right, motorcycles, we wanted to talk about them. So as you can see from the context of events in the 70s, the development of this technology made it possible to implement it in a fairly lightweight chassis. And sooner or later, a turbine had to be installed on a motorcycle. Who exactly was the first to build a turbo motorcycle is unknown. However, by the mid-70s, such motorcycles already existed in the United States of America. These were not production machines, but specially built devices by enthusiasts for drag strip racing. Here, for example, in this photo from 1977, Terry Vance, one of the most famous quarter-mile racers in the United States in the 70s, is sitting on a turbocharged Suzuki GS 750. This Suzuki motorcycle was equipped with a turbocharger from American TurboPack. And here are photos of Russ Collins and his turbocharged Honda CB 750F, late 70s. Since then, crossing cars alongside drag motorcycles, the turbo has become an integral part of the design, allowing for more impressive results. However, by the mid-70s, there were only a handful of turbo bikes in the world. But very soon, in just a couple of years, the situation will change dramatically. In motorcycle manufacturing, there is a term known as the golden era of turbo motorcycles. This event took place in Japan at the end of the 70s and the first half of the 80s, and the entire big Japanese motorcycle quartet was drawn into this arms race. A similar event took place from the mid-20s to the early 50s in Europe with supercharged motorcycles. But, as you remember, that's a topic for another story. So Japan, 1978. The motorcycle industry is already established, with the four motorcycle giants clearly standing out, developing neck and neck and presenting new, more powerful, faster, and more technologically advanced motorcycles every year. A real arms race. And in 1978, the company Kawasaki presents the world's first production turbo motorcycle model, the Z1R Turbocharger, where Turbocharger stands for turbocharger. The motorcycle owes its appearance to Alan Messick, the former executive director of Kawasaki. The idea to surprise the market definitely succeeded. The stock exhaust manifold was replaced with a custom one featuring an American TurboPack turbocharger. The turbo had an adjustable wastegate, a valve for releasing excess boost pressure. The operating pressure was 0.6 bar, which allowed the 1-liter engine to produce 122 horsepower. Nowadays, that number doesn't surprise anyone. Modern sports cars with naturally aspirated engines have over 200 horsepower. But let me remind you, this was 1978. Another cool thing was how the Z1R turbocharger delivered that power. It did it fiercely and was definitely not recommended for inexperienced riders, especially for those willing to buy a two-wheeled rocket with no engine warranty. And there was none, even though the factory installed a reinforced crankshaft, valves, and valve springs in it. Some madmen even thought of setting the wastegate to a pressure of 1.4 bar. Just imagine that. The Kawasaki Z1R turbocharger turned out to be a motorcycle whose chassis did not match the potential of its engine. In 78 and 79, about 500 units of this motorcycle were produced, with the later versions featuring somewhat more refined tuning. 4 years after the production of the Z1R turbocharger ended, another turbo bike would roll off the Kawasaki assembly line. In 83, it was the JPZ 750 Turbo. After taking a break for almost half a decade, Kawasaki engineers tried to fix most of the problems of the first turbocharged model. The inline 738cc four-cylinder engine of the JPZ 750 Turbo with a fuel injection system was equipped with a turbocharger. It's important to pay attention to its placement. The engineers positioned the Hitachi compressor not behind the engine, but in front of it, as close as possible to the exhaust ports. This layout made it possible to reduce turbo lag and improve throttle response. A moderate boost pressure of 0.7 bar was enough to achieve 112 horsepower at 9,000 RPM and strong acceleration above 5,000 RPM, a top speed of over 230 kilometers per hour and a quarter-mile time of 10.9 seconds. Let's go back a bit to 1978 Kawasaki by creating the first production turbo motorcycle, challenged the entire motorcycle industry, especially the Japanese manufacturers. Honda, Yamaha, and Suzuki simply couldn't ignore this challenge. In 1982, Honda joined the Turbo Mania, and at that time, they weren't interested in creating another crazy rocket. The Honda team took the classic CX500 motorcycle model as their starting point. Yes, that very classic with an engine similar to the Moto Guzzi style. The power unit was prepared to handle a pressure of 1.3 bar, which was supplied by a compact IHI turbocharger. The preparation involved installing a reinforced crankshaft and connecting rods, as well as using forged pistons. This was the first time Honda used them in mass production. The turbo boost didn't turn the 250 kilogram CX500 into a wild rocket. Its engine produced a rather modest 83 horsepower at 8,000 RPM, compared to 51 horsepower in the naturally aspirated CX500. The turbo Honda reached a top speed of 201 kilometers per hour, which is pretty impressive for a 500cc tourer from the early 80s. The company didn't just stop at installing a turbocharger. The model featured a Pro-Link suspension, an anti-dive front suspension system, and an informative dashboard with a boost pressure indicator. And overall, it turned out to be a pretty well-balanced motorcycle. Honda CX500 Turbo was produced only in 1982. The following year, the CX650 Turbo model was introduced, with its engine capacity increased to 673 cc. The IHI Turbocharger was modified. Its hot part, the turbine wheel, kept a diameter of 50 millimeters, while the cold compressor wheel was increased by 3 millimeters to 51. The pressure was slightly reduced, reaching 1.1 bar, but the 100 horsepower it produced was more than enough. The CX650 was better than its predecessor, more power, less turbo lag, and a smoother power delivery. This model was produced only in 1983. Only 1,777 CX series turbo motorcycles rolled off the Honda assembly line. In that same year, 1982, when Honda introduced its first turbo model, Yamaha joined the race. The company with the cross-tuning forks on its logo introduced the XJ650 Turbo, which would eventually become the most mass-produced turbocharged motorcycle in history. From 1983 to 1985, about 8,000 units would be produced. It had an inline four-cylinder engine with a displacement of 653 cc air cooling and 4 Mikuni carburetors. They used a Mitsubishi supercharger with a compact 39mm turbine wheel. With lower inertia and generating only 0.5 bar of pressure, it boosted the engine output to 90 horsepower at 9,000 RPM. And at the very least, it made throttle control more predictable and comfortable than its competitors. The turbo Yamaha accelerated up to 203 kilometers per hour. In many ways, the XJ650 Turbo was similar to the naturally aspirated XJ650 Seco model, but the turbo version had improved suspension and brakes. And now take a look at the brilliant commercial from Yamaha. A Porsche is driving around the track, a fast and daring car, and suddenly the turbocharged Yamaha overtakes it and pulls ahead. If I had seen this commercial in '83, I would have smashed my piggy bank without hesitation and gone to buy a Yamaha. Suzuki was the last company to jump on the turbo craze bandwagon in '83. From '83 to '85, 1,153 units of the XN85 model were produced. Suzuki ended up with a more or less similar machine to its competitors, an inline-4 673cc and 85 horsepower at 8,000 RPM. The XN85 was the first among Suzuki's production motorcycles to use a 16-inch front wheel, which had previously only been seen on racing machines, and it received a full-floater rear suspension with a monoshock. And besides the Japanese Ford, during this period, Moto Morini was working on a motorcycle with a turbo. By the late 70s, the leaders of the Italian company realized that their firm was losing to the Japanese in every area. At Moto Morini, they decided that the optimal solution to compete with their rivals from the land of the rising sun would be to equip their 500cc air-cooled V-twin with a turbocharger. Yes, sometimes the simplest ideas require the most complex solutions. At that time, installing a turbo on a motorcycle V-twin was considered a very difficult task. It was all about the uneven exhaust gas pressure at low RPMs due to the asymmetrical firing order and the problem of cooling the rear cylinder. And at that time, only Honda managed to do it. Moreover, they didn't have the second problem. To solve the first problem, Marini simply decided to block the turbocharger at low RPMs. The system allowed you to set at what revolutions per minute the turbo would kick in. The user could choose anywhere between 2,000 and 3,000 revolutions per minute. This 480cc engine produced a maximum power of 70.5 horsepower and 64.5 newton meters of torque. Unfortunately, Marini's attempt to surpass the Japanese by giving a small motorcycle high power and good handling did not live up to expectations. Japanese naturally aspirated sport bikes of those years were more or less superior to the Moto Marini 500 in almost every way. The 500 Turbo was never put into production, and Moto Marini was sold to Cagiva in 1987. And all this seemingly active fuss of the big four motorcycle companies completely died down by the mid-80s. And since then, turbo on a production motorcycle was forgotten all the way until 2010. And in terms of the number of turbocharged, two-wheeled vehicles produced, the figures of the Japanese motorcycle giants in the 80s have still not been even remotely surpassed by anyone. Multiple factors led to the sudden end of production turbo motorcycles in the 80s. The first reason is the high cost. Installing a turbocharger on a motorcycle and at the same time reinforcing the engine components to handle the new power output is an expensive pleasure. The second reason is that the presence of turbo lag was a critical argument against it, and besides, this technology was frankly weak at low RPMs. And the last but very important reason is that motorcycles have long since learned to be fast, sharp, and bold types of transport, even with naturally aspirated engines. After the golden era of turbo on motorcycles, for a long time no company took on this task. A new millennium arrived, and turbocharging remained the domain of custom builders and daredevils. However, closer to the 2010s, a number of exceptions would appear. The first two motorcycles on this list are equipped with a turbo diesel. The first one, Neander Turbo Diesel, debuted in 2008 and was equipped with a unique power unit. Its 1.4-liter parallel twin has two crankshafts with two connecting rods for each piston. This power unit produces 112 horsepower of maximum power and 214 newton meters of torque. These figures allow the 300-kilogram motorcycle to accelerate from 0 to 100 in 4 seconds, and its top speed is around 220 kilometers per hour. The best part is the fuel consumption, just 4.5 liters of diesel per 100 kilometers. Back in 2008, the company announced its intention to produce about 250 units of this cruiser. According to one of the websites, the motorcycle was produced up until 2020 with some minor design improvements. However, the exact number of units actually produced is not known for sure. By the way, there's a detailed episode about the Neander Turbo Diesel on the channel. Here's a pop-up suggestion. The second turbo diesel, the Trek T800 Common Rail Direct Injection, appeared in 2009. The Dutch company Evo Products, led by Erik Vecht, created this diesel marvel, which outwardly resembles the fierce sibling Kronreif Trunkenpolz Mattighofen adventure. Work on the T800 Common Rail Direct Injection began back in 2006. The motorcycle is equipped with an 800cc 3-cylinder turbo diesel engine from a smart car, producing only 45 horsepower, but it has plenty of torque, 120 newton meters. The dry weight of the machine is 225 kilograms, and it consumes only 2.5 liters per 100 kilometers. The Trek T800 Common Rail Direct Injection features a hydraulic all-wheel drive system. Using hydraulic motors and hoses, 15% of the power is delivered to the front wheel. The maximum speed of the motorcycle is around 180 kilometers per hour. At the time of its release, this machine cost around 17,500 euros. At the end of 2009, Erik Vecht had about 400 orders for the motorcycle, and his company began assembling the first batch of 25 units. It was a good attempt to create a mass-produced diesel adventure bike and compete with BMW, Kronreif, Trunkenpolz Mattighofen, and others. All-wheel drive, a range of 900 kilometers on a single tank, acceleration from 0 to 100 in 3.7 seconds, all with the sound of a tractor. However, in the end, the company faced a number of problems and ceased to exist. The exact number of T800 units produced, not these ones, is unknown. In 2010, a production gasoline turbo bike appeared. Andrew Morris presented the luxury motorcycle model Icon Shin Superbike with a turbocharger at the Goodwood Festival of Speed. The motorcycle was created in honor of the legendary racer Barry Sheene, one of the most successful motorcycle racers in the United Kingdom. Barry passed away in 2003 from cancer. Andrew Morris received permission from Sheene's wife to use the surname in the motorcycle's name. The goal is to honor the racer's memory and at the same time make some money. The Icon Shin is powered by a modified and hand-assembled engine from a Suzuki Hayabusa with a displacement of 1,400 cc, featuring a turbocharger, Carrillo connecting rods, and Wiseco pistons. The engine's maximum power is 252 horsepower, and the torque is 180 Newton meters. The Suzuki power unit was chosen for two reasons. The first and most obvious is that Sheene won 2 world titles on a Suzuki, and the second less obvious reason is that there was already enough data on the successful turbocharging of Hayabusa engines. Otherwise, it's a luxury-built motorcycle with top-of-the-line suspension, brakes, carbon bodywork parts, and so on. Well, when it first appeared, this rocket cost about $160,000. Icon Motorcycles ended up producing 52 motorcycles. Not much of a production run, honestly. Why 52? Is it because that's how many playing cards are in a deck? Yes, as strange as it may seem, Andrew Morris was guided by exactly that number. Each motorcycle has a hand-painted image of a playing card held by a girl in a bikini. Naturally, they're all different. 3 years later, in 2013, Suzuki presented the Suzuki Recursion concept at the Tokyo Motor Show. By 2013, it was no secret that Suzuki was actively working on creating a mid-displacement sport bike with a turbocharger. The Recursion is equipped with a parallel twin engine with a displacement of 588 cc and a single overhead camshaft. This engine could boast 100 horsepower at 8,000 RPM and a torque of 100 Newton meters. And while the power turned out to be rather mediocre compared to the GSX-R 600, the torque was on par with leader-class motorcycles. 2 years later, Suzuki took another step in the turbo niche. This time, at the Tokyo Motor Show, the company presented the XE7 engine, which, unlike the Recursion power unit, received a head with 2 camshafts and also became more compact. This time, Suzuki was more reserved and did not disclose the specifications of the XE7. However, as you can see, in 8 years, Suzuki still hasn't released a new production turbo motorcycle. But the developments in this area haven't gone anywhere, and who knows, maybe in the near future, a turbo motorcycle from Suzuki will finally make its debut. Things are going well with turbocharged customs around the world. Adrenaline and thrill seekers put a turbo on any motorcycle, from Chinese mopeds with a copy of the Cub engine to huge Harley V twins and Japanese inline fours. Everyone does what they can. For example, Eurocore from the Motocore channel created the Turbo Alpha. On his channel, he talked in several episodes about all the details and difficulties he faced while installing the turbo on this very moped. The link to his episode is in the description and in the pop-up hint. By the way, Yuri is just one of the craftsmen who have equipped the Alpha with a turbocharger. You can find quite a few similar custom builds online, but probably the most popular motorcycle in the world for installing a turbo is the Suzuki Hayabusa. I think many people remember the crazy video from 10 years ago with the 500 horsepower turbo Busa going all out. Here are those shots. The top speed was around 360, but the coolest thing, this Busa passes a liter sport bike at 300 kilometers per hour on the rear wheel. Also, one of the big names in the turbo niche is Trask Performance. a company that produces turbo kits for Harley Davidson. This solution allows you to get up to 300 horsepower from large Harley V-twins. Let's sum it up. Turbocharged motorcycles have not become mainstream, and there are a number of reasons for that. I've already said that motorcycles have long learned to be fast without turbos, nitrous, or any other kind of boost. And considering the fact that installing a turbo significantly increases the cost of the finished product, what do you think the consumer will choose when the characteristics and quality are similar? That's right, the cheaper one. Yes, today designers and engineers have solved the problem of creating compact turbines that can easily be integrated into the design of a motorcycle. However, turbo lag still exists even in modern turbines. Its effect can be minimized by installing several turbines or using a variable geometry turbine, but it all comes down to money. Add to this such negative aspects as an increased center of gravity and weight, a more complicated design, and increased heat transfer from the exhaust manifold to the rider. That's why a turbocharger on a motorcycle is for athletes and adrenaline junkies. I should note that the supercharger, in the modern context, has a better chance of becoming mainstream, all thanks to one detail. It doesn't have a lag. Since the drive is mechanical, the compressor speed directly depends on the engine speed. That's why the Kawasaki H2R has been so successful, and just recently Honda announced a supercharged Africa Twin. But we'll talk about that in detail in a separate segment. That's all I have for you. As always, this was the Krasmodo channel. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to support it with a comment, a repost, and a subscription if you haven't subscribed yet. Special thanks to everyone who supports my channel financially using the details provided in the description. See you next time.